Our growth and success become much about the whole, the consistency. It is not a strategy built upon a few individuals. It is a strategy built upon the collective production and success of all of us.
Hey there, and welcome to Under the Roof, the official podcast of Baker Roofing Company. I'm Todd Kavanaugh.
And I'm Matt Elban, and we're here to connect the dots between field and office, leadership and crew, values and action.
In each episode, we dive into the stories, lessons, and updates that matter to our team.
From safety and career growth to company milestones and good old-fashioned storytelling, it's all about living out what makes Baker, Baker. Let's get into it.
Hey there, and welcome back to Under the Roof.
I'm Matt Elban.
And I'm Todd Kavanaugh, and today we're sitting down with someone you all know, John Matthews, who's here to help us unpack what it really means to be an employee owner at Baker.
So, John, there's been a lot of talk around the ESOP, and today we're going to dig into what that means, how it works, and why it matters, not just for the company, but for each one of us. But before we do that, question that I kind of like to always ask people, what's the last book that you've read, and what did you take away from it?
Oh, geez. Probably be one that's relatively boring to most. But the last book I read was called The War Below, and it is actually about rare earth mineral mining in the 21st century and how mineral rights come about and how that affects geopolitical conflict. So that was the last book I read.
Wow. That was different than where I was thinking that was going to go. That's awesome.
Hey, it had a lot to do with copper. There's your tie into the roofing industry.
That's a great tie-in. We've all been getting the emails about copper prices going through the roof, so no pun intended. For people that haven't seen your office in the new building in Cary, there's a huge line of books sitting right behind you, and I'm guessing maybe 30. Military history, strategy, biographies. John, what draws you to these different topics?
Anecdotally, the books exist here because they were pushed out of my house and my wife didn't want boxes sitting in the corner. So they appeared here and now they just create this nice backdrop. But look, I think history is a subject worth studying, albeit at times boring because it's the study of past events. But at the same time, it gives us insight into why people act a certain way, how in-depth information goes to really understand the whys behind things, because they're not always as they seem. They're not always as they seem on the surface. There may be different motivations for making certain decisions at certain times. And the more we understand about that, the better we can apply that to our current living situation. So I happen to have a master's in history with a focus on war studies and peace and conflict. So that's why those books are what they are. That's also why they're here, is because my wife said, get them out of the house.
Understood. My wife has given similar comments to me that you need to remove the 17 piles of books you have at the home about sales topics and all this stuff. So anyway, we're looking into maybe finding ways to give away a few copies of the book each month that we do this podcast. And so we're still fleshing that out, but looking forward to that in the future.
If anybody's interested in rare earth minerals in the war below. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that orange book there that I can see behind your right shoulder, I guess that is Sun Tzu's Art of War, right?
It is. That's how you apply 400th BC century strategy to, they always laugh and say how applicable it is to corporate America. I don't think so. I think it was pretty applicable to 400th BC strategy. But it's an interesting read nonetheless, and certainly has some applicability to modern warfare, but I don't know about business. It's kind of ruthless.
So you brought up business. Let's get down to business a little bit. So John, you were part of the ownership team that made this ESOP decision. That's what we're talking about here today, is the ESOP. So give us your background a little bit, and what experiences have you had that shaped how you think about business?
You brought up the history subject, and you asked the question, and I would say it's been varied. And I'm going to come back to that because I think that's a key point. My exposure to business has been both from an institutional perspective, that is the government doing business, but then also private business. And I will say the latter has certainly been a whole lot of fun and enjoyable. But the reason for that is just the sheer interaction and ability to communicate with people, with people that care, that share a common mission, a common goal, common sense of character and who they are and what they're here for. This is totally anecdotal and everybody will fall asleep when they hear this. But, a couple of the books behind me actually or on my shelves are about a businessman in Costa Rica in the mid 1940s who eventually caused a rebellion in 1948 that dramatically changed the Constitution and the trajectory of Costa Rica within about a 19-month time frame that propelled it to be the most stable and economically viable country in Central America in the 21st century. And a lot of that had to do with his philosophy on people. And in his business, he was one of the few businesses at the time that actually distributed food resources to his employees, ran a daycare center, had benefits that sort of were not parallel during that time or in that region. And he chose to do that because he knew that the most important aspect of his business was not necessarily the product they produced or the relationships he had in the capital city, but more importantly, the employees that worked there and how proud and confident they were with the company, but also with their lives. And he saw the two as synergistic, meaning one was not independent of the other. They all flowed together. And so I think some of those thoughts and obviously other things feed into my philosophy on business, which is it's all about people. It doesn't matter what widget you produce. If you aim to produce the highest quality widget in the best interest of the customer and you take care of the people who are engaged in that, then all should move forward in a positive direction. So it's an interesting mix, and not all businesses assume that philosophy because at the end of the day, it's probably not the most profitable way to run a business. But when you look at the holistic picture and you think about training, professional development, encouragement, motivation, growth to allow people to grow in their careers, all of those things, yes, they may cost more at the time, but they are an important part of the story of success of any institution.
That was a fantastic answer.
Can you share with us the name of that businessman?
He's called Don Pepe, but his last name is Figueres. And anybody who knows history of Costa Rica, Jose Figueres was president and then was sort of a behind the scenes, I would say, godfather of late 19th and early 20th century politics, not only in the country, but also in the region. And he was all about Costa Rica. He took money from the CIA, money from the KGB, hated communism. He was all about a socialist and capitalist approach to the betterment of the country and the stability of the country. So that's it. Not a ton written about him, but if you do read about him, I think you'll find him to be a very interesting character.
John, you come from a little bit of a sales background and you're used to explaining maybe complex things in simple terms. In fact, I've been on several sales calls with you at several PA customers where I've witnessed you doing that and the fluidity in which you do it. Today, you're basically our ESOP salesperson, helping people, whether that's in the field, people actually putting on roofs and repairing the roofs, to people in the office, coordinators, construction managers, project managers, department heads, all the way up to executives, all of us, helping us understand what it actually means to own part of Baker Roofing. How do you approach that?
You mean from a sales perspective?
Yeah. You're trying to share with us insight into what it actually means, what this transition and change looks like. How do you come at that?
I think there are two ways to look at it. One is externally, and let's just take that really quick and think about it. The opportunity for the company to be employee owned in the current broader industry environment is unique. And it's unique in a sense that we talk about our fundamentals, we talk about character and business, we sell on quality and pride and longevity. And now we can also say to the industry, hey, we are the only company in the top 10 commercial roofing and sheet metal manufacturers that is actually an ESOP. And we're competing against companies that are either roll-ups, which means there's some entity that's acquiring these companies and pooling them together to create a larger company, or they're focused on gaining outside institutional equity through primarily private equity or some other form of merger in order to transition next gen of management or next gen of ownership or growth or however they want to perceive it. And so it's very unique that we would be the only one in the top 10 that now fits that moniker. And I think carries a lot of weight with the industry in terms of how consistent has this company been and will they continue to be? How bought in is this company and will they continue to be? And, how does their track record and what they say indicate actually or what they do? For us, all of those things align now. So alignment, consistency, those are big factors in the business in building trust with OEM partner manufacturers as well as customers. And I think this is just another feather in our cap for walking the talk, if you will. On an internal perspective, and I think we'll probably discuss that over the course of this call, it's just a unique opportunity to take a company that was privately held and essentially expand that shareholder membership to a much broader population, meaning the remainder of the employees in the company that are eligible or that will be eligible. And so from my perspective, or at least our growth and success become much about the whole, the consistency. It is not a strategy built upon a few individuals. It is a strategy built upon the collective production and success of all of us. Again, just like we look at it externally, it's a unique way to approach the business, and it's a unique way for all of us as individuals to feel like we are really contributing to something of value and something that has a return to us as individuals.
That makes sense.
One of the things I've realized, it's probably like even more so for you, you've been looking at this for a long time now, what an ESOP is and what its benefits are. And I've been looking at it for a little bit of time, and Matt as well. But for many people, this is really a brand new concept, and they've only heard about it now maybe twice. Starting from the very beginning, when someone asks you, what actually is an ESOP? Can you explain what that means?
It's ironic because I hadn't planned the commentary, obviously, before some of the history references, but it's a blend of socialism and capitalism. So you're basically taking a capitalist structure, a company in a free market, and you're converting its ownership to a collective, which is a large group of individuals who are sharing in the profits through share value of that company. And so it truly is a unique way to look at business. And I think it allows for a corporate organizational structure that pursues growth in top line revenue and bottom line profits while allowing every eligible employee to participate in that growth. So growth isn't something, it's not a charge the hill mentality because we need to charge the hill. It is a charge the hill mentality because this is one of the ways you will grow shareholder value. So it's important for each individual to know the why. And I think the structure itself allows for a company's operational strategy and infrastructure to remain constant and consistent. Just like we talked about externally, this projects consistency in our operations. Well, internally, it does the same. But it also provides increased motivation for all to deliver the best quality product possible for the customer, knowing that that in turn will produce the kind of revenue and profit that we want to achieve. So it's a unique way to approach business and business ownership, but in a way it makes all investors in the future progress and growth of the company.
It's really good.
Certainly like the idea of looking at it as each employee is an investor in our collective business. So I've heard it described as similar to a 401k, but designed to hold company stock. For someone who's maybe never considered our 401k plan or maybe doesn't participate in it or ever thought about maybe owning stock before, can you break that down at all? What does that actually mean to own a piece of Baker Roofing?
The structure itself is somewhat similar to a 401k in its process for vesting and its intention to provide long-term benefit. And that's about where it stops, but think about it that way. However, its methodology differs when it comes to contributions and growth. Maybe an easier way to think about it or parallel it is to think about the current company match that goes on to 401k contributions that supplement. The match comes from the company at no additional cost or contribution from the participant. And that match goes into the value and grows over time because it's invested. In the case of ESOP shares, the growth is predicated on the success of the company, obviously rather than outside investments in capital markets and other income producing strategies that you would employ in a 401k or a retirement vehicle. Instead, it's based on company growth and profitability. And thus, the collective company has the ability to grow its own value through its internal strategies, a mix of work, geographic expansion, et cetera. So in a way, yes, it's gaining monetary value towards retirement or 401k, but collectively, we have a lot more control over the outcome than we might even in a conservatively invested 401k. So you can look at them with the same intentions, as they are both designed to provide assistance to creating a sustainable retirement plan, but they are two separate vehicles for doing so. I think the question's been asked, does this replace the 401k? How do they work together? How do they work separately? And I would really want it to resonate loudly that this does not replace the 401k. Rather, it should, over time, supplement individual employees' retirement planning strategy. So the 401k remains the anchor, the foundation to any individual retirement planning. We do encourage and will continue to encourage all eligible employees to take advantage and contribute in the 401k. That is your anchor. Your ESOP share values over time, as they grow, will begin to sort of mirror that and create an additional ability to see a savings growing because of your hard work, effort, sweat equity outside of the 401k.
That makes sense.
And I love what you said about we have a lot more collective control as a team over what that value is going to be. And I think we're going to dive into that a little bit more as the episode continues. So
the word collective, there might be some people out there shuddering because they're hearing socialism and collectivism, and they could pick up their books and go, what are these guys doing? But think of it all as the light version. It's more of a way to enhance and share capitalism than it is to create different form of governance. So we use the terms, but the terms are not necessarily what you might read in, say, the Communist Manifesto.
You could also maybe liken it to an NFL team, right? They have collective control over how well that they're going to play as a team on the field that day. We have collective control as a team here of how well we're going to play on the field. And that directly impacts the value of our company.
It does. And not to be confused with collective bargaining, which would be suggestive of something else, which this is not. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But this is really about collective participation in the increasing value of the company going forward.
I like how you said it there.
So here's the big question, John, that everyone is probably thinking, what is this actually worth now? How do you value a company that is not traded on the open market, traded on the stock market?
Yes, that's a good question. It's not one that's efficiently or easily explained or defined. And I don't mean to be cryptic in saying that. It's just there are many factors that go into determining present and future share value and or company value. Let's talk company value first. In a scenario like this, obviously an independent valuator walks in and values the company based on a number of factors. Earnings before income taxes and depreciation, what the market trends are, backlog, cash on hand, debt on hand, what the trailing 36 months or 3 years of growth have been for the company, what its mix of work strategy is. That is, how repeatable is that business or how transactional is that business? How profitable is the book of business, meaning gross margin, and then how profitable is the business itself, meaning contribution or net profit. It looks at all these factors. And anytime you have any kind of valuation done like this, it's done by independent third party. So that it is done with the best practices and standards and principles based on valuations. And hopefully not only that, but it's independent third party that has some knowledge of the construction industry. So it also understands how construction accounting occurs, how backlog and work in progress schedules occur, and what the comps are out there in the industry. And then obviously you do a light version of that going forward each year just to assess yearly progress and growth. in that same trickle down format, all the way from top line revenue down to net profit and all of the things that impact it along the way and what those metrics and key performance indicators are. So when you think about valuing any company in any industry, that's sort of how it's done. In the construction industry in particular, a lot of the value is based on earnings before income taxes and depreciation, or EBIT or EBITDA, as opposed to top line revenue. When you look at Google or Meta, sometimes those are valued on top line revenue just because the market cap is so large and the way the industry moves and changes is so fluid. But when you look at manufacturing, construction, et cetera, it's kind of looked at in a through similar lens. How do these share values increase over time? I think you have to take into account what are the things that either propel or hold the business back in a year. And so those are key factors, macro or microeconomic cycles. Is there something going on within material supply that is impacting our cost? Is there something going on within buying interest of our customers that's impacting our ability to sell? What's our debt structure? That is, how much of our gross profit is going towards debt? What's our expense structure? How much of our gross profit is going towards expenses? And how does that net into profitability? And then also on top of that, which is always a factor in our business, is how is our cash flow? So how frequently are we billing? How effective are we at billing? What's our accounts receivable days out? Because not only does that impact the flow and flexibility of the business, it can also impact, based on the way we account, month-to-month profitability of the business too. So all things that everybody hears on a monthly basis, but all things that are very relevant to annualizing and then figuring out like what the value of the company is for that given year. And then transitively, what the values of those shares are going to be for that given year. So I think that's something that people are going to have to get comfortable with. And I think it's really important for everybody to understand that you're sort of owning something or acquiring something at ground zero. Maybe not the best term, but let's just call it zero or par. And par is zero. What you got to do is you've acquired the asset, but now you got to improve on all those things. That is, reduce debt, improve cash flow, improve profitability, improve top line revenue. As you do that, then that zero turns into value of 1, value of 4, value of 8. And so that's going to be how it grows at a very basic level and how share value will grow. But I think the big assumption that's got to be made, and it's very rational and happens in almost all transactions like this, is that essentially when you start, you're kind of starting at zero. And then the ESOP trust and value is working its way up the ladder from that point forward.
I think that makes sense. And you answered some of our next questions. But one of the things that really resonated with me there towards the end of that, you mentioned billing and collecting and performing the work and all these things that we all do every single day. And sometimes it gets into the monotony of our jobs. But all of those things done exceptionally well at this point are building value in our business and causing our business to be worth more. The more efficient we are in those things, the more we're able to do those things excellently. Those things are directly related to the value of our company. That's huge.
Just to touch on one of those as a case study, it's billing. So if you look at our mix of work, and I think every branch has this, your service revenue has grown, which means your work orders and small ticket projects that you're going to bill on a regular basis, it's grown in volume. So that body of work has become a greater percentage of our monthly billings. If crews go out week 1 and week 2 of the month and perform their normal regimen of work, and we don't bill that work until the end of the month, we then bill a customer who has anywhere from 30 to 60-day terms with us. So they may not pay us for another 30 to 60 days. Let's call it 45 on the average. If we wait 15 to 20 days to bill them from the time we do that work, we're adding another 15 to 20 days to our receivables that we don't have to add. So the quicker we can figure out processes for same day billing or same week billing, And that begins to be more of a rolling process rather than a wait till the end of the month to bill certain things. And I know it's tricky because you got to collect information and you got to bill appropriately and you got to have pictures and all the things that come along with it. But if we can continue to work on that and making it a more efficient process, that will improve cash flow, which improves our outstanding AR, which improves month-to-month profitability. So that's just a micro aspect of how all these things rolled up into one can really impact the flow and profitability of operations.
Hopefully that resonates with anyone listening, in our business, any employee. There is a push for those things, and also recognize that there are people working hard at figuring out how we can do them more and more efficiently. That's keys.
And I think that's why when people hear about some of the automation that's going on, some of the process implementation that's going on, some of the issues maybe foremen are having and transferring information, some of the issues coordinators may be having, it's a difficult process given our volume, but it's a worthy process, I think, for us all to be working on, and really grateful for everybody trying to do that because it has an impact.
So John, talking about really what the employee owner experience is like, let's talk a little bit about the day-to-day. So what has actually changed for employees? Because, the way I understand it is we don't actually have voting rights in the traditional sense if you were own a publicly traded company. But when people ask, do I really own this company? How do you answer that? What does ownership actually mean for employee owners at Baker?
One of the good things about this structure and a shift to this structure in terms of day-to-day operations is that we can maintain the consistency of our management structure, the consistency of our operational structure that we currently have, and operate and grow within this new organizational structure. So that's one of the best things about this is management style corporately and in the branches doesn't change. Processes don't change. We're just going to always look for continual improvements, but there's no either overarching or day-to-day change in our philosophy on how we do business, how we handle the customer, and how we handle employees. That's probably the best thing about this. And then to the question of, do I really own this company? So this is how it'll break down. Participants will own shares held by the ESOP trust. The ESOP trust is actually the entity that owns the company now. And individual shares are not considered voting stock, nor do they carry the personal liability of traditional individual ownership. So you kind of get a trade-off there where, it's not necessarily voting, but I don't have to sign on the dotted line for equipment loans and all that stuff that we're taking out. So there's a benefit. Instead, it acts more like owning non-transferable, non-tradable, not very liquid, but shares of company stock that's privately held and not traded on open exchange. So you said earlier, how is that valuated? It's not the markets or Wall Street is not valuing our shares or valuing what our company is worth. Instead, we're basing it on industry standards and comps and our own ability to operate efficiently and profitably. Shareholders will have access to annual reporting and their own individual statements, which is great. Yet they can't become market makers or accumulators of the stock outside of the plan provisions either. There's no method or market for trading these shares, buying additional shares, selling shares. It's very stable. And while that to some may seem like a hindrance, that is actually one of the structures that allows it to be so stable and not subject to wild fluctuations you might have if you owned a publicly traded stock that was subject to winds of an industry or winds of tariff rhetoric or winds of Wall Street that could affect negatively and positively the stock on a variable basis. So it adds some structure to it. I think that's fairly critical. But again, when you go back to, okay, I get my annual statements and I get my reporting, I think having a realistic and rational expectation about the first couple of years is critical. We talked about it earlier, but this is not an overnight get-rich-quick program. It is an opportunity for shareholders to basically start, like we said before, at ground zero and collectively build their value from that point forward. So I'm going to continue to say factors like debt repayment, proper mix of work strategies, cash flow, expense controls. They're all things that are going to contribute to the company's future profitability. And they're all things that are going to make all individuals feel as if they have a stake in the company. And I think it's things we've talked about before. It's things we've benchmarked about before, but I don't think it's had the impact on every employee that maybe it could have or should have, or that it will have in this type of environment. So it's a great way to have a stake in the growth of the company in a somewhat controlled and somewhat conservative environment when compared to a publicly traded stock on Wall Street. But like a publicly traded stock on Wall Street, you don't necessarily have a say in the strategy you're running of the company. But in this case, you have a little bit more ability to affect it because you have a say in the daily operations of the company and how efficiently and effectively they run. So it's a great hybrid.
Love the point of the organizational continuity, because I have some dear friends of mine that worked for a company in Raleigh that about 5 or 6 years ago was acquired. And it was incredibly disruptive, confusing when new management stepped in, new culture stepped in, and it was incredibly disruptive to this business, and they lost some employees as a result. So the fact that we were able to make this transition, yet maintain this continuity of leadership and of doing it the way we have always done it and trying to improve upon that has really made it, and I think, very non-disruptive. And that's why in some cases, people are like, oh, we transitioned to ESOP because it hasn't felt like anything has actually happened differently. And so I think that's a good thing.
John, from a strategic standpoint, you were part of choosing this decision option over other options, selling to private equity, going public, whatever they might have been. Why was employee ownership the right choice?
And you're right, there are other options. I think all of us were intensely concerned that any outside capital influence might also want to have an influence on culture and on people, that is people in management and people in branch management and trajectory. And we continue to be extremely excited about the current corporate culture. We know that it takes cultivation and it takes daily improvement, but we're really excited about where it is now and where it can continue to go. We're very excited about all the folks in management throughout the organization and those folks developing in their roles and moving on to new roles. And the last thing we want to do is to infuse some sort of outside capital influence that would be suggestive of any change there. And I think that bottom line is, while we're open to change and we're open to new ideas, we feel like we have an understanding now of where we sing, if you will, in the roofing industry in terms of mix of work. And we know that those dials need to change based on market preferences and based on the tactical ability of different operating units. And we don't want to be bound by one strategy over the other. We want to remain nimble enough to shift those strategies, whether it's new construction, re-roofing, service and maintenance, or other services. We want to be able to shift those strategies to address the market demands and needs. That being said, we also want to focus on those strategies because we've had success with them, and there's no reason to dilute that. We want to continue to focus on making them better and better. So when you look at our confidence level in our culture, our confidence level in management teams across the board, and the quality of our installers and techs, and then when we look at just where we think we sit in position in the marketplace and the industry, and what we've learned in terms of how to remain nimble, how to really sort of engage in and go after the opportunities in the business. We wanted the company, meaning all of us, all employees included, to be in control of that. And if you go to Wall Street and you go public, there are others pulling the strings on valuation and visibility and perception of the company. If you go to private equity, someone else walks in with a bag of money and they're going to want to control things. And they may or may not have the same philosophy on people that we do. And if you look at merging with their company, you're looking at bringing two cultures together. And even if those cultures are somewhat aligned, there are always going to be differences. And there are always going to be individual differences in personalities. And you never know if any of that could upset the apple cart or tip the scales in a direction. it wasn't positive. So when it came down to this, the option made a lot of sense. I will also say that our confidence in the option was a bit predicated by Mark Lee's involvement and knowledge of some other companies that had done this and had witnessed the track record of that and the process for that and some of the partners and vendors they utilized that they'd had success with. And so it wasn't as if we said, well, let's just try this and see if it works. It was, let's do this because we have seen it work in other places and we have confidence that we too can make it work. And so I think all of that rolled together made this, when you got down to the end of the day, an easy decision.
I'm excited for what it means for us as individuals, as a company. I'm excited to be part of the culture of continuing the build and the growth that we've got set out. So
this is my final question. What music, podcast, or audiobook is on heavy rotation for you right now? Or maybe it's silence. I don't know.
Silence makes me nervous sometimes. I'm a classic listener of old school U2 and Dave Matthews Band. And so it would not be uncommon if you got in my car, you'd hear one of those two things rolling around. I kind of tell people I sort of dress and listen to the same music and read the same books as I did 25 years ago. I guess that's just one place I'm pretty comfortable with. But yeah, and podcasts, they vary tremendously. Some will be business related. Some will be absolutely not business related, but I do listen to them. I do like them, especially driving down the road or out walking around. And I encourage everybody to take advantage of them. They're so cost efficient and so informative. That's a tricky one, Todd. It could vary from day to day, but there's some suspects that are usually around.
Nothing wrong with some DMB.
Because sitting back there, I've got one of my favorite albums of all time, Dave Matthews Band's Before These Crowded Streets.
You can also throw the Eagles in there too. Eagles fans are disappearing around the world, but I still remember the first 8-track I ever had was an early Eagles album, so they stay close to my heart too.
That's awesome. Well, guys, that's it for this episode of Under the Roof. Big thanks to you, John, for breaking down what the ESOP means and how it shapes the future for all of us.
Thank you all very much for having me and let me participate.
And if you've got questions, I'm sure maybe some of you that have been listening do, and we hope to in the coming weeks just to continue to bring you more information about the ESOP. We plan on having a very informative town hall coming up in maybe a couple weeks. So just stay tuned, and we're looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast so you never miss an episode and share it with your crews.
And remember, we shall do good work, at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always good work. See you next time. That wraps up this episode of Under the Roof. Thanks for joining us and being part of the Baker Roofing family.
If you liked what you heard, share it with your crew. Hit the follow button and keep the conversation going wherever you work.
We're here to keep you informed, inspired, and included, because the more connected we are, the better we work together.
And as always, we'll leave you with this. We shall do good work, at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always good work. See you next time.